herbs today, and freezing really is my favorite way to preserve herbs because just look at how fresh these look. I just took these out of the freezer. They are frozen, even though they don't look it at all, and they taste as fresh as they look too, which is why I love this method so much. I do a lot of single herbs and herb blends. Today I'm going to show you how to prep and cut and freeze my winter soup blend, which is a blend of herbs I put in every soup or stew that I make. And for this herb blend, you will need parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, which is a really great group of very savory, very cozy herbs that go perfectly in soup. One question I'm often asked is if I wash my herbs before using them or freezing them, and no, I don't. I grew these myself, I picked them with clean hands, and they're not dirty. If yours are dirty and they need to be rinsed, you will need to dry them really, really well before you start prepping them for the freezer. First up is parsley. You can use flat leaf or curly. I tend to like flat a little bit better. And I'm going to start by removing the leaves. You can get some of the littler stems in there like I'm doing right here, that's fine, but avoid using any of the bigger, thicker stems. With sage, I try a little bit harder to leave out the stems, and I like to use my fingernails sometimes to kind of snap them off the stem. These stems are a little bit woodier than parsley, for example. So it's okay if you have some of it in there, but I try to minimize it. Now, rosemary is my favorite herb to prepare. I think it's kind of fun and I love how it smells. So pinch it at the top and then you're just going to strip the needles right off of it. Really easy. And thyme. Thyme is the most tedious of all of these herbs. So whatever you can on the stalk, strip downward just like rosemary, but when you get to the top part, you can't really strip those down as easily, so you have to be careful. You can still strip them upwards. You have to be just a little bit more finesseful so you don't just break the whole stem in half. I'm going to get to chopping here while I tell you a little bit more about how to measure out the ingredients for this blend. So first of all, parsley. You kind of just have to wrangle it into a loaf as best as you can and hold it down while you chop it in multiple directions. It really is best to do each herb individually. Do not try to pile up all 4 types of herbs at once and cut them because they just cut so differently. And don't use a food processor either. The end goal here is to have kind of a medium small piece. They don't have to be teeny tiny by any means. And so I'm going to start by chopping it one way. I'm going to turn the whole loaf around and then I'm going to chop it the other way. And then I'm going to chop it a little bit more too. So this recipe is measured in a ratio or in parts. And the recipe is 5 parts parsley, 2 parts sage, 2 parts thyme, and 1 part rosemary. And you can use whatever you want to measure a part. I think that a 1/4 cup measuring cup is kind of a good place to start. So I always do, if I'm doing 5 parts of parsley, I am going to do 5 1/4 cup measurements of parsley. If you want to make a smaller batch, or maybe you just don't have as many herbs as I have here, you can use something smaller for your part, certainly. Like if you want to do 1 tablespoon as your part, you'd be adding 5 tablespoons of parsley. I just pretty much always use a 1/4 cup. I like to grow a lot of herbs and preserve a lot of herbs, and it ends up being just a nice amount at the end. Sage is one of the more satisfying herbs to cut. I love the way that the leaves just line right up for you so nicely. And just like the parsley, I am going to chop these pretty small, and I'm going to start by doing it in one direction, and then I'm going to flip the whole bundle around and cut it in the other direction too. A good, really sharp knife is especially helpful for chopping herbs. Just like the parsley, I'm going to keep cutting this until it's in like kind of small, medium pieces. And now the thyme. This is what it looks like straight from the stems. There are some individual leaves, some clusters, and some kind of skinny stems. I don't mind the stems. I'm going to try to chop them up though, so I corral the thyme as best as I can into a pile and just basically run my knife through it in every different direction. My main goal is to chop up any of the longer stems or clusters that I see. And last is rosemary. Similar to thyme, you just kind of gotta pile it up and do the best you can to break it into smaller pieces. Because the leaves or the needles are already pretty small, this is an easy one to chop. And my goal is just in general to make it a little bit smaller than it already is. And it definitely doesn't have to be perfect. I still certainly have some whole leaves in here amongst the chopped ones, and that is just fine. The next step is to pile all of the herbs into a mixing bowl and get mixing. They do need to be mixed fairly thoroughly, and I think the best tool for this job is just my hand because I can be really gentle and I can fluff them around as they're mixed. And as far as freezing goes, we are going to freeze them just like this. They don't need any water or oil or salt or anything added. I really like these small rigid containers that are meant for the freezer. They do a really good job of protecting whatever you put in them, but you can also use a quart-sized freezer bag. The important thing is to use a small container or multiple small containers because this will go in and out of the freezer multiple times. If you use too big of a container, by the time you get to the bottom, they won't be as good of quality. Even if you're super careful and super quick, every time you take this out of the freezer to use it, they will thaw just a little bit, so a small container really is best. And by the way, I'm really stuffing them in this container. It looks full, but I keep adding more and more. That is pretty much it. I'm going to put a lid on this, I'm going to label it, and then stash it away in the freezer. Now, whenever I need to use herbs, I just take the container out of the freezer, pinch out what I need for my recipe, and put the container immediately back into the freezer. You can see how loose they are. They don't stick together really, unless they were wet when you froze them. You should be able to pinch them out. If yours were wet and you couldn't get them totally dry, I would use a quart freezer bag instead of a rigid container like this. Besides my winter soup blend, there are a couple other blends that I like to make regularly too. This one is a Greek blend, and this one is a little bit sticking together more. I must have had a couple wetter herbs in it, which is fine. You can see I can still break it apart. This is really great for meatballs, meatloaf, chicken, potatoes, things like that. And then I also have a ranch blend. And this one I use almost exclusively for making homemade ranch dressing. It is so delicious. Both of these herb blend recipes are in my book, Freeze Fresh, which I will link below. And there you go. That is how to freeze my winter soup herb blend. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up. And make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you are the first to know whenever a new video is posted.